think about
Okay,
Dua
hi friends, hi
Dua
listeners,
Lipa?
hi people who are here for my podcast. Hello, if you're not here for my podcast, hello to you as well. I guess you found your way here because of the algorithm or tags or whatever. In either case, my name is Jonathan. I am, during the day, an insurance appraiser. By night, I'm a writer, I have a podcast, but that's not why you're here unless it is. You're here today for a desk makeover in a fun millennial pink color. I am making this video, one, because I want to be able to showcase to myself what I can do and show to like my friends and family, hey, this is what I do with the furniture that you guys give to me because you know I love broken furniture. And I also kind of want to answer questions that I always look for answers to, whether it's like Googling it really quick before I go into Lowe's because we support Lowe's in this home, or if it's looking for answers that a 17, 20, 30, 40-minute video dances around and doesn't answer straight up. That's what I want to do. In this video specifically, I'm going to be jumping to a couple of questions that I always ask and can never remember, and now I've kind of found a method that works 100% of the time. And the main question is how to paint laminate furniture properly or durably. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me make a note here that we are going to go ahead and start the video so I can kind of walk you through what we're looking at here. So basically what we're looking at here is chair and desk combo that I was gifted, kind of like a Christmas present, except they were very well used, which is fine. The better to DIY and make over with. So we've got this desk chair combo. I'm not really sure where they originally come from. The label says Costco, but not like Costco wholesalers. It's COSCO, so I'm pretty sure it's just overseas somewhere. I mean, the chair is made of metal. The seat is some sort of vinyl, and the feet are just a shiny regular metal. The seat was pretty torn up. I ended up reupholstering that, videoing the whole thing, and it disappearing. So sorry about that. You just see it in the end. The desk is all laminate. You can see on the sides it's kind of busted up some parts of it. And I mean, I don't, there's not a lot I can say about it. It's a normal piece of furniture. It's laminate, very shiny, very slick material, and I find that normally when I paint stuff like that, the paint just peels off when I use a latex paint. So the first question is, can you paint a laminate piece of furniture with latex paint? The answer is yes. You just need a couple of extra things, in my experience, with normal day-to-day use on this piece of furniture. So what we're looking at right now is where a piece of the laminate snapped off and a piece of the drawer on the corner snapped off there as well. Luckily, I had the larger pieces. They actually broke off and were still in the desk. So we're actually going to be able to reattach a lot of it. The drawers were lined and that was annoying. So here we are attempting to reattach the particle board pieces, not so much because I was worried about the integrity of it or anything, but just so I don't have to use as much filler material. So I'm using some Gorilla wood glue, and I'm gluing the original chunk back to it, clamping it down, and I wasn't sure if the wood glue would work on the laminate like backing or side piece that I'm gluing on right now. It worked really, really solidly. Gorilla just makes really good products. I don't know what to say. Their hot glue is fantastic. The wood glue is fantastic. The super glue is fantastic. We love it all. But so here we're just kind of gluing everything back together, clamping it down, and I let it sit overnight actually because I'm really guilty of not waiting long enough, and waiting long enough for things to dry helps immensely. Like you have no idea. Clamping that side piece down was a little difficult, so I just used some tape, and the tape luckily doesn't really stick to the wood glue or super glue that badly, not enough to where you really have to worry about it, so that kind of just worked out fine. So now I'm using a little bit of wood filler to just touch up the corner there on the skinny kind of pen and paper drawer, and I'm going to let that dry completely, and then you'll see later I come back and sand it. Again, here I'm just gluing down some veneer that had come loose. It wasn't, broken off or anything. Luckily, There weren't too many spots like that, but I just glue it, clamp it. Same here in this spot. A piece of veneer was missing. I didn't have it, so I just filled it in with wood glue. And my biggest tip is when you're filling it in with wood glue, or not wood, yeah, wood filler. When you're filling it in with wood filler, you want to go ahead and overfill it so you can sand down a smooth surface. In that spot, you can see I have to go back and fill it in twice because it just wasn't sticking and sticking out far enough to where I'd get a flat surface. And I never got a clean, pristine edge, but that was okay. My goal with this video and my goal for any DIY, and you can see I'm just sanding everything down here smooth. I use like a 60 grit sandpaper to get that really smooth laminate finish to accept paint and primer. Don't mind my dirty clothes. It was vacation time, baby. I'm not here to show off and stunt. I'm just here to make a video. But my main goal with this is to figure out how to paint furniture for myself, and for people who are rehabbing pieces of furniture that either they just really like the shape of, because I love the shape of this desk. It's very mid-century modern with 3 stacks on one side, 2 pin legs on the other. But it needed some paint, and I wasn't worried about it being like showroom perfect. That's not the point. I'm okay with seeing some signs of wear as long as it's solid and back together, and I don't think it's going to fall apart. So here I'm sanding the surface. You can kind of see it losing that shiny glossy finish. I don't want that. I end up using a flat paint and a matte matte polyacrylic finish to seal it, but we'll get to that later. But what I will advise you, if you're sanding, these are just kind of cheap wood legs like you can get at Home Depot for pretty inexpensive. When you're sanding a kind of a cylindrical or a spherical rounded surface, be careful that you don't leave flat spots. I was guilty of that here. You can see where the raw wood is exposed. I ended up with flatter spots. But it worked out because I was using a flat paint, and the the more matte the paint, the less of those surface flaws you're going to see. You also lose some durability sometimes, but it doesn't really matter. Like I said, if you're doing it for yourself and you're not looking to inspect it for every single flaw, you're not going to notice it once you paint a few layers of paint on it. It's going to be fine. With the chair, like I said, it was just made of metal. It kind of feels like wrought iron, like 90s furniture with wrought iron. And I just sanded it down to get some of that paint off. Again, if you sand down too much, you are going to have flatter spots on rounded surfaces. Be careful of that. I would advise even just using a piece of paper and hand sanding it. Just to rough up the surface, but not flatten any surfaces. That was kind of my bad. But again, you don't really notice it unless you're really looking, and I'm not really looking. My apologies for all the dust flying across the camera. Not a YouTuber. Just doing this for me. I'm taking off all the handles. I thought about painting them because I don't like gold. It's not my favorite color. I'm sanding the drawer fronts here. We're just going to go through a bunch of sanding here for a minute. So I don't like gold. It's not one of my favorite metals. My favorite metal is chrome, followed by anything in the kind of silvery, cool family. Then we get like copper, bronze, and gold is kind of last on my list. But mid-century was all about warm tone metals. You didn't see a lot of cool tone metals unless it was in electronics. So I did go ahead, and I'll spoil it for you. I left the handles the way they were, and they look fine. It's not a huge thing that like bothers me a lot. It's just something that I normally would spray paint them or something. But handles are hard to spray paint because spray paint is not really that durable. It seems durable, but it's not. And you end up with finger marks and stuff. Now you can see here the part where I had previously glued everything back together, that whole corner, I'm now just filling it with wood glue so that I can sand it down later, and so this drawer kind of takes an extra step each time. But that's just to keep it from really just to keep it from paint kind of dripping in there and having to do more later. Now I'm priming the legs. Now I want to warn you, the primer looks pink. It is pink. I tinted it myself. It was white. I only tinted it so that you could kind of see where I had and hadn't painted as I was going along, because I didn't want there to be a bunch of like video where it looks like I'm just painting white on white. That's not very entertaining or interesting. And I think it does help in contrast for you to see kind of how much the primer is covering in one coat. Because the thing that is important, it seems vital to me, is you have to use a primer with sanded laminate furniture. I use the Zinser primer. I usually use the water-based one, I believe. It's super super good for adhesion once you've sanded and everything. And you can see I've tinted this primer pink as well. It's awesome for adhesion. So I would recommend that heavily. And the secret that I have kind of found is you have to let it dry completely. Between the primer and the actual paint that I chose, I waited a full day. I let it completely dry, and then I did the scratch test, which I heard from a different YouTuber, which is basically if you can run your fingernail over the paint, the primer, whatever it is, and it scrapes off, you don't have to like dig your fingers in. I do just to make sure. You don't have to. But if you can dig your finger through the primer, through the paint, and it doesn't scratch and come off, that if you're kind of doing damage to the surface before you're doing damage to the paint, you've got good adhesion. And that's really important to make sure that you don't end up with like large chunks of paint just peeling off of that surface, because I have made that mistake of painting like Target laminate furniture without sanding first, and you end up with like basically if you put anything warm on that surface or anything wet on that surface, the paint will just peel up and disappear. Like there's no saving it, and you end up with a piece of furniture that you wish you had never painted. I'm priming this metal. I will tell you that if it's a kind of metal with texture, or it seems kind of like any metal, if you're painting with this primer, that paint is not coming off. Like it's not going anywhere once you do. And I wasn't super particular about this chair because I didn't think I was going to keep it. I don't like it. I didn't like it at all then. Just it wasn't my style. The back of it kind of bugged me. But I think it was just me looking at it in its kind of damaged state. And once I painted it and refinished the top of it, I liked it a lot better. So that's the color I'm using, Tea Rose. It's a Bear color. I really like it. I got the paint in Bear Flat, which is like the most matte, regular indoor-outdoor paint you can get. I like it because it hides flaws really well, and I feel like, if anything, like I'm here to hide the flaws that are still there. Because you can see, like where I've patched up the desk, you can still kind of tell. Because there's no way to get it perfect when you're like me and you live in an apartment and you're using minimal tools like a roller and a hand sander. It's not possible. You can see I'm painting the edges of the drawers. I painted the bottom of the desk and the drawer edges as well that you can't see, just because I wanted them to look finished if I ever did happen to notice them. But we're going to do a bunch of painting here. This is the actual color. I really like it. The videos don't really do it justice. Again, I'm in my pajamas in these clips, okay? Am I painting clothes? We're not here to serve looks, we're here to paint. Painting the legs, you can kind of see in this first coat where there were bare spots of wood where I had sanded too much, but once that paint goes on, you can't see it, and once it dries matte, you can't see any of those flaws really at all. So we're skipping right along here. So important things so far: use a primer. Zinser primer is my favorite. You have to use one if you're going to be painting on a laminate surface, or any surface really with latex like wall paint, because walls don't get that much traffic. What gets a lot of traffic is furniture, and if you're going to be interacting with that furniture a lot, make sure you prime it. The other really important thing is sanding. If you sand those really super smooth surfaces beforehand, you can kind of just use any paint you want. Like a lot of people say, oh, use a chalk paint, because when you do that, like you don't have to worry about sanding or priming, blah, blah, blah. That's great. I don't really want to be limited by what colors any random chalk paint brand makes. So sanding and priming is really important, and then you can kind of go wild with your colors and what you use to refinish your piece. So now I'm painting this chair. These little wavy bits were kind of hard to do. I ended up just having to double hand, one hand with a brush, one hand with a roller. And just do my best. Again, the chair is not my favorite, but it fits the desk really well, so unless I find a replacement, I'm not going to worry about it. I did get some paint on my armchair. Oops. Somebody's going to be mad about that, probably not me. But look, once there's a layer of primer on this chair, and you can see that bare metal, once I paint over it, one layer is enough to kind of like hide those imperfections from sanding. 2 layers, because I ended up doing 2 layers of top paint, top coat, top finish, whatever you want to call it. 2 layers of that, you can't see anything. And again, if it's a matte or a flat coat, you're not going to have to worry about it. It's going to hide everything. So that's where I was after 2 coats of paint. There's me swatching some. I wanted to go with green for the seat, but I ended up going with pink, unfortunately. I just thought green would be fun, but everybody that asked was like, no, green is going to look ridiculous. Go with the pink. So I went with pink. You'll see in kind of the end products. It looks good. I think green would have been fun, but I ended up making out of foam board and that scrap piece of velvet, just like a little mat to go on top of the desk, just as something to rest your arms and stuff on. To me, it just kind of is a nice pop of color that's another rich, vibrant, kind of decadent color like Millennial pink is. Um, I really like it. I'm putting the handles back on here because I did decide, like I said, not to paint them. I didn't want to deal with the paint coming off or having fingerprints or marks or like leaving your hand silver if you grabbed them. I just thought, not a big deal. If I want to switch out the furniture handles later, I can always just do that. They're not all very expensive. These, I will say, are pretty flexible. Inexpensive, I think, handles. They're like plastic. So I'm not too concerned if I do want to spray paint them later and then just replace them. But you can see here, this was after letting the top layers of paint, the actual paint color, dry for a full day. It was so the paint was so tough that I could go ahead, put the handles on, screw everything in, and I wasn't worried about messing it up. I used to worry about that. Like I thought, oh, when I wouldn't prime or sand, have I waited long enough so that the paint's not just going to peel off when I take the handles off? I took the handles on and off like 3 times. The worst I had was a little chip of paint, but that was just because I put the handle on a little too soon on the top drawer. Not a big deal. Here you can see I'm wiping this down after I've sanded it. I mean, I sanded after I put 2 layers of the pink paint on there. And that just gives you a smooth surface to apply your top finish on. I used a water-based polyacrylic to finish this desk. It was matte because I didn't want to. Here you can see I'm just touching up the little spots. I didn't need to, but I thought, why don't I just touch them up just so I feel better. It's a Minwax polyacrylic water-based top coat. You can see me putting it on there. That's as shiny as it will ever be, and it dries down completely matte. Like there was no difference in the finish afterwards. And you can see I'm picking out hairs because these cheap paintbrushes that I got from Lowe's, they were garbage, mama. I had to pull so many hairs out, but it's not important. So I'm doing this. I only did 1 coat, and it was kind of a sloppy, lazy coat of polyacrylic, just because the sides of a desk, the drawers of the desk, the little rims of the desk, those are not getting that much traffic, that much uh, interaction. I'm not so concerned about that paint because I've prepped it so well. I know that the paint will be okay. If I need to wipe it down or something, the paint that I got had the ultimate scuff defense in it, which meant that I could wipe it down, wash it, and it shouldn't be an issue. Like you saw me wipe it down with a wet rag. The only thing that came off was the dust from the sandpaper. And what I will advise you when you're sanding your top coat of paint before you put on a top coat, make sure you're using like a 400 grit sandpaper because you just want to level that surface out. You don't want to like take any of the paint off unnecessarily. It's just kind of a waste of your time and your work. So use the finest grit sandpaper you can. Like when I was sanding, barely anything was coming off. Again, that's because I kind of prepped the surfaces so well beforehand, but it does lead to a much smoother surface. Now, here's a fun surprise that I decided on last minute. You can pick up these little samples from Lowe's, right? Just little paint samples, and I pick these up every time I'm there, just random colors I find. This blue was not my favorite. When I picked it up, I just thought, oh, I'll use that for something. And then I thought, why don't I just paint the insides of the drawers? Like what is stopping me from painting the inside and the sides of the drawers so when you pull the desk out, not only does the inside of the drawer look nice and cover up some of the paper and glue and stuff that was stuck in there, but why not paint it so that when you pull it out, the sides of the drawers aren't just the unfinished wood? And I got some paint on my curtains. So the unfinished wood, it's actually like a color, like a contrasting color. And I thought about doing green, but again, everyone said that green wasn't really that good of a color to use with this pink, even though I think it would have been. So I used blue because blue, red kind of counteract each other. This blue is a darker blue. The pink is a much lighter red, you know? So I thought that could be really interesting. And I also thought, oh, if I hate it, I can paint the sides of the drawers pink. It turns out I really like it. Everybody, like my cousin who I got this desk and chair from, I sent her a picture of it and she really likes it, so I'm happy about that. And when you're painting wood grain, because I didn't bother sanding really carefully on the insides of the drawers because it's going to get messed up. I'm using this drawer as like storage for my supplies. It wasn't really that important, so just paint against the grain of the wood. Like you can see it going from side to side on this drawer. Paint against the grain, and then you'll cover up more of those lines that you can see from the grain of the wood. On this one, the paper that was glued down was really stuck and raised up, so I did take my sander to it with like a 60 grit sandpaper just to get off any junk that I could, and then smooth out anything that was stuck, and then I just painted over it. Again, I'm doing this to use myself, so I'm okay with some flaws or imperfections. If you were like gonna sell this, flip it and sell it, maybe you would want to be a little more careful or take a little more time. But if you're doing that, then you're probably not watching this video. You already know how to do it, or you don't have any questions that I could answer, so you've tuned out by now. If you're still watching this and you're just thinking about like, oh, I found this piece of furniture on the side of the road, or I have this piece of furniture I want to flip but I don't know how, and it's like something from IKEA, you know, like a cheaper IKEA piece. Love them, but they're all laminate. You want to figure out how to paint them? The keys, as I've said before, sanding, take your time, sand every smooth surface until you can run your hand over it and feel the grit of the surface itself. And priming. If you prime and let that primer dry thoroughly beforehand, you're going to be in a much better spot when it comes to durability of the paint. Because that's what I worry about is, am I going to do all this work and then the first time that something touches that surface, all the paint's going to peel up? So far, have not had those issues with this method. I will say that basically what I ended up doing for the top of the desk, and you'll see in the next clip, is I went to Lowe's and got an acrylic sheet, and it was I think like $40, and had them cut it to the dimensions of the top of the desk so that I don't have to worry about it. It looks neat and clean and nice, and I really like the way it looks. You can see it's shiny up there on the top, and you can see some other stuff. I've just kind of styled it, and I did warm up the clip just so you could see what it looks like in person. That dark blue contrasted with that pink I think is really lovely, and you can see that just one coat of that blue really covered up any imperfections, any of that weird stuff. You can see the chair, I covered it in pink velvet, and there it is in its actual spot in my house. So I really like it. But before I go, I just want to, you know, if you kind of zoned out and now you're like, oh, let me tune in, what were his points for refinishing this laminate piece of furniture? Number one, as soon as you get it, sand it down with a rough grit sandpaper. That's my number one tip. Sand it down until the surface doesn't feel like it did before, until it feels almost like when a piece of like raw wood gets kind of wet and then the grain is raised a little bit, just rougher than you would think you'd want it before you paint it. Sand it down really well. That's going to be good. And then of course, clean up that dust in between each coat. I know it sounds counterintuitive now that you've seen me do it, or maybe it sounds not counterintuitive, but maybe it sounds like common sense one way or the other to you. The second thing that I cannot stress enough is use a primer. I use the Zinser primer, Zinser. I get it at Lowe's. There's several different kinds. Just read the label on it and make sure that the one you're getting is good for the kind of actual paint that you're going to be using. Like I said, I have not had the experience using this method. For point number 3, I don't think you have to be super specific with your paint. I think you can use pretty much any type of paint you want. I wouldn't say you could use like acrylic paint, but I think you can use latex or oil-based depending on which primer you get, as long as you use a primer and you sand properly. I used a latex-based wall paint, like a regular wall paint you get at Lowe's, and I have not had any issues. So tip number 3 is make sure that your primer matches up with the paint type that you're using. If you're using an oil-based or an enamel paint, make sure that the primer you're using is good for adhesion to that type of paint. Also remember, enamel and oil-based paints to me are a little bit more durable. The finishes are not as pretty as latex-based paint, but they are a little bit more durable and tougher. Like If regular wall-based paint is soft, you can kind of scratch it off if you try hard enough. Enamel-based paints aren't really like that. They dry hard like enamel. Those are better for high traffic areas. You're going to be cooking, wiping things down on it, getting it wet, getting it dry, exposing it to temperature fluctuations. Those are better. They come in a more limited range of colors, but enamel-based paints like that are better for tougher areas you need to stand up to a lot of wear and tear. Do remember though, those smell a lot worse. There's a lot more fumes from those, not like house paint, like wall paint, and they do take a lot longer to dry. Whereas you can usually top coat or second coat a wall-based latex paint after as soon as it feels dry. You cannot do that with an enamel-based paint or an oil-based paint. You have to wait for it to completely dry. Otherwise, you're just going to mess it up really badly. And those are not as easy to get off of a piece of furniture as a latex paint if you have to start over. So point number 3 is make sure that your paint matches your primer, and make sure that you're using the right type of paint for what you need it to do. Okay, so to reiterate, just because this is the question I always have, can you use any type of paint on any type of furniture? In theory, yes. If you're painting a piece of laminate furniture, a piece of wood furniture, a piece of metal furniture, in this video, I painted actual wood, I painted laminate, and I painted metal, all with the same paint and the same primer, and it worked fine. So it doesn't really matter what type of paint you use, as long as you prep correctly. So the biggest thing is make sure your primer matches your paint. Number 4, use a top coat. It sounds counterintuitive because I said how durable they're going to be, but it never hurts to be extra careful. With this latex paint, I used a water-based polyacrylic top coat. It's not super thick. It does smell a little bit more than like your regular paint does, but it will kind of give you an extra layer of protection for that paint, especially if you're using a matte or a flat paint. You can get a matte top coat, a matte polyacrylic top coat. It'll still be really low shine. It'll still have that kind of modern, duller look that a lot of people really like. I really like, and that mimics a chalk paint without kind of the loss in durability. I would highly recommend it. Do a test area, but do that for just about every project that you do. Put a latex safe top coat on your paint. A clear sealant is just gonna extend the life of your paint and make it more durable and easier to clean and easier to maintain in the future. And then just kind of a couple of little tips. Remember, when you're sanding something that's not flat, not to linger on one area. You're gonna get flat spots. If that happens to you, if you can do it, use a matte finish paint and a matte finish top coat. Really, it just matters what your top layer of finish is. So use a matte top coat to hide those flaws if you're concerned about them, and you can use a matte top coat. The other thing, if you're doing something like a desk or a bar or maybe a counter or a dresser that you're going to be interacting with a lot, if you're doing a surface that's horizontal and you're going to be dealing with it a lot, what I would recommend is go to Lowe's, don't go to Home Depot because they don't support everyone's right to live. Go to Lowe's, get an acrylic sheet. They will cut it for you to whatever size you need and have it cut to that top surface. But 1, it looks really nice and clean and modern. 2, it's easier to clean than whatever finish you were thinking about using. Even if it's like a high gloss finish, it's easier to clean. Okay. 3, it's replaceable. So like if you get marinara sauce on your paint and it's stained, you have to repaint, because some things are just going to stain your paint. If you get it on your acrylic top sheet and say it's so hot that it melts the acrylic, you can just throw it away and get a new piece. That is a really good way to kind of mitigate any of those things. Like if you're using it as a crafting area or something and you're worried about paint spilling, just get an acrylic sheet. It eliminates all those issues. And a little tip I like to do is once your top coat is like your polyacrylic top coat is pretty dry, but it's still got a little time to go, put that sheet on top of it, and it'll kind of flatten out that area a little bit and give you a smoother finish if you ever do decide to take the acrylic off. Don't put it on when it's wet, but once it's dry enough that you know it won't stick. My last kind of tip is, besides just like have fun with it, which is a boring thing to say, is make sure that when you're handling the piece, when you're in the in-between stages, wait long enough for it to dry, wait long enough for it to be ready for the next step. Because if you wait long enough, you don't have to worry about the layer underneath drying through the layer on top of it. You don't have to worry about, am I going to put fingerprints in the paint, lifting it up, doing whatever. I moved this thing in like 4 different rooms in my apartment, and because I waited long enough, I didn't have to worry about it. So remember to sand and clean after you sand, prime, okay, use the right primer, use a top coat if you can, and also get an acrylic sheet just to top it off if that's something you can do. I will say, if you're doing a lot of like found furniture that's free, or just free furniture, or like Goodwill finds, or gifts from people that are free, investing a little bit in like an acrylic sheet for something you really like, I think is a pretty wise investment, because it's gonna protect that piece a lot better than like just putting a top coat on. So without further ado, I've been talking for 30 minutes and there's only 20 minutes of footage, so we're going to be sitting on this end screen for a while, but I appreciate you coming by. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can subscribe. Please listen to my podcast if you like gay stuff, because I know you're surprised by the sound of my voice. I am gay. I write queer romance novels, and I go, each season is a different story. So stop by, listen to those if you want. You can leave me comments, likes here. Only nice stuff though, because I'm sensitive and I have depression, and I can't handle mean comments. So leave me all those things. I know this video was long. It's my first foray into making this type of content. I do have some more projects already kind of purchased and in my house. I have 2 chairs that I'm currently thinking about flipping. One is a vintage cornet folding chair, and the other is like a 1980s vanity chair. So if those sound interesting to you, they'll be much shorter videos with just quick tips, because they're not big projects. Stay tuned, because I'll be back. But anyways, thanks for listening and watching, and I hope you like this project. I think it's beautiful and I love it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.
I'm fucking gamed out. Get that fire exit door. I'm off.